This is Tony Poulos at CommunicAsia 2012 in Singapore. It's been a very busy event in many regards, including a very jam-packed schedule of summit sessions, as well as a very large exhibition space. I have with me John Tanner, Global Technology Editor from TelecomAsia. John, welcome. You've been attending a lot of sessions and you're an old hand at these shows. How is CommunicAsia shaping up this year in Singapore?
The summit's been interesting because they didn't really have a lot of lead keynotes like you see at other sessions. They just sort of went straight to the tracks with a lot of different focuses, which I think is an indication of how specialized a lot of interest is becoming in these different topics that are affecting the industry right now. I mean, you've got next generation mobile broadband, which is quite obvious, but you've also got completely separate tracks for social value-added services, mobile payments, mobile commerce, over-the-top services, which was a pretty contentious one this morning, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of concern about over-the-top services for telcos. How do we deal with it? How do we fit into that value chain? Should we block them? And so on and so forth. But it represents, at the heart of everything, the key theme, a mindset that they have to change in order to be able to deal with that. Because as Mark Hukill of National University of Singapore put it this morning, the days of easy gravy are over, and you're just going to have to get used to that.
Wow. What are the other trends that you've heard of? I mean, Over-the-top was interesting, but were there over-the-top players here actually saying what their concerns were, or was it just the telco world?
No, it's been a mix. I mean, you've had over-the-top players come in. I mean, Google's been had a lot of presence around the show saying, oh yes, we're very interested in working with operators, and operators never seem to believe them, but that's the message that they want to put out. You also have, today, for example, we had eBuddy, who is sort of like an over-the-top messaging player out of the Netherlands, talking about their service and how they want to work with operators and work with them in a fashion where they can integrate their service more in line with their networks and do revenue sharing and make money, which in theory is appealing to operators because their SMS revenues are under threat from over-the-top players. But then it becomes a question of, well, if your idea of revenue sharing is 0.3 cents on virtual goods, which is what eBuddy has in mind, and I'm charging 10 cents for every SMS that goes through my network, then what's the incentive for working with that? But then you look at the numbers, they're going down. At some point, there's going to be an inflection point where you have to make that kind of call.
And you'll probably want to do that business. In terms of the exhibition itself, at this venue at the Marina Bay Sands Convention Centre, they've had to split the comm side or CommunicAsia side with Broadcast Asia, but we've seen a lot of interaction between the two, and in fact I've heard now that they're going to merge them back together next year. What's the reason behind that?
Well, I do understand that they are planning to co-locate Broadcast Asia here at the Marina Bay Sands with CommunicAsia this year. Part of that is practical because Suntech is going under some renovations at that time, so they have to do it anyway. However, there's been talk about merging the sessions because in terms of the exhibition, there's a much bigger emphasis on satellite this year. Singapore Exhibition Services did a lot of effort to promote that fact that you had a lot of satellite operators here. All the major ones are in town, and a lot of their suppliers as well. And they're really pushing the message of DTH, which is the biggest driver of satellite services right now. DTH is huge in Asia. It's growing all over the place. It's expected to be a very big grower for just about everyone who's in that business, particularly, SES Satellite, for example. And the synergy is just fairly obvious when you're talking about DTH neighborhoods and you're talking about broadcast. They kind of go hand in hand. And then when you start translating that into things that telecoms players are looking at, like multi-screen services for their IPTV services, pay TV, all these things come together. It just makes sense for it to be much more synergistic than it has been when it's been separate shows, and I think they're seriously looking at that.
Well, I had a chance to talk to Inmarsat, and they're talking about M2M traffic on satellite and voice traffic, generating a lot more voice traffic, and even backhaul on behalf of operators worldwide. I'm starting to think there's a merger of the technologies now, and certainly in terms of transport mechanisms, satellite is now a critical player. It's not just cable anymore, it's not undersea only, so we're getting there.
Well, I asked Drew Brandy of Inmarsat about why they were getting into M2M now, because the problem with satellite doing M2M in the past has always been the cost. It's always been much more expensive, and he was telling me about how hardware prices have come down, the air prices have come down, and it's made it much it's made much more business sense to be able to get into that market now than it did several years ago when people were looking at doing like SCADA applications and linking up smart meters for oil rigs and that kind of thing. So now's the time for them to get into that market, especially now that they've already invested all that money in their next generation broadband satellite fleet, and they can make use of that, and that's what they're doing.
So on top of everything else, we had a couple of interesting sessions where some interesting stories and acronyms, or not acronyms, but analogies were drawn between our industry and others. What were those?
Well, the famous one, and one of my personal favorites, was the idea from Grant Watts of Amobi, who said that data is the new crude oil. And mobile operators are the oil rigs,
right.
And you don't want a data spill.
Right, you don't want a data spill. And of course, his company is the builder of the rigs. But it does make sense because we have all that data in its crude form. We're not able to do anything with it. We have to refine it and distill it. So actually, I think the analogy is pretty good. And in terms of mobile advertising, and I sat in that session, if they don't get that profile right on the customer, then that mobile advertising push falls on deaf ears. So it's a clever one. What else did you do?
It is. Well, keeping with the petrol theme, Mike McDowell, CTO of Huawei Technologies and also their solutions consultant, yes. I believe. He was talking about. He was talking in the OTT sessions, and he was talking about how telcos think that people see value in certain things about them that they really don't. They try to compete on brand and high service quality, but users don't really care about that. They see, in his words, they see broadband as sort of like the gas that goes in your car. And they don't care about the gas that goes in the car, they care about the car, which in this case is iPhones and smartphones and applications and so on.
On an end to that one, in terms of the over-the-top player argument that was coming up everywhere in a number of sessions, telcos are always saying that they know their customer very well, they own the customer and they have all this data on them. But the guy from Google actually got up and said, well, actually, we know the customer better than you know the customer. And they've been collecting data on their customers for a long time and pushing advertising and search mechanisms to those customers. So we might have a battle on our hands on who owns what.
Well, there is an interesting debate about that because telcos like to say that they own the billing relationship with the customers, which is true. But on the other hand, Facebook knows who all your friends are, and which is the more valuable bit of information. And it depends on who you ask, obviously. But there's got to be some middle ground somewhere where they can come together on that, because the billing relationship is of value to over-the-top players to some degree, but it's the question of how you bundle that and package it together in a way that makes sense to them and that everyone makes money.
Also depends on who your friends are and if you've actually got any. And on that note, thanks very much, John. It's great to have you back at CommunicAsia, and we'll see you again shortly.
Tony, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.